Headshot Booster and Headhunter don't deal headshot damage despite activating on headshots. Lucky Shot's bonus weapon damage isn't the same as other sources of weapon damage. Inhibitor will reduce the damage of Holliday's 3 by 42%, not 35%. These statements might seem stupid, but I can assure you they are true. This is part 1 of a Dead Man's Guide to Weapon Damage Instances. Some important disclaimers. This video builds on the knowledge of these two videos, so watch these videos in order to understand this video. This video, part 1, will cover how each of the following are calculated, while part 2 will cover what happens when weapon damage instances are combined. Any math shown in the center of the math screen won't always work if you simply put the numbers in a calculator, so make sure to look at the bottom of the screen for the exact calculations if you are interested in doing the calculations yourself. First of all, what is a weapon damage instance? I define a weapon damage instance as a source of weapon damage that is not the player's weapon. Most weapon damage instances are items or abilities that players would perceive as an additive or multiplicative boost to their weapon damage. They are not, as they are their own source of weapon damage running their own calculation. To explain it visually, if you shoot your weapon, it will show one number on the damage display. If you increase your stats, you will see the number on the damage display increase, but you will still only see one number on the damage display, assuming you wait for the damage display to reset. However, if you buy an item or use an ability that is a weapon damage instance, you will see that two numbers show up on the damage display: the total damage and the most recent instance of weapon damage. The reason for this is because the bullet from your gun calculates the amount of damage it will do, and the weapon damage instance will calculate the amount of damage it is supposed to do. These two sources of weapon damage will be applied to the enemy simultaneously, which is why we see two numbers on the damage display. Weapon damage instances, being their own source of damage, will show up on the damage breakdown, unlike items that are simply a stat boost. Weapon damage instances all base their damage calculations on the weapon damage formula. However, they either add, replace, move, or remove variables which make them quite unique. The first weapon damage instance I will cover isn't actually a weapon damage instance. The bonus weapon damage from Alchemical Fire doesn't show a second damage number on the damage display, and the bonus weapon damage isn't shown in the damage breakdown under Alchemical Fire, but rather gun damage. This therefore means, by my own definition of weapon damage instances, that Alchemical Fire is not a weapon damage instance, but instead just another variable in the weapon damage formula, albeit a weird one. For the following tests, a friendly dummy will use Alchemical Fire for us. Grey Talon has a base bullet damage of 22.5, which is displayed as 22 due to rounding. While the enemy dummy stands in Alchemical Fire, he takes 31 damage, an increase of 9, which just so happens to be Grey Talon's base bullet damage of 22.5 multiplied by Alchemical Fire's 40%. If we increase Grey Talon's base bullet damage to 40, we can see that the damage gained from Alchemical Fire increases to 16. Which is 40% of Grey Talon's base bullet damage. Remember this value of 16, as it is what we will use to see if Alchemical Fire is affected by anything. If we increase weapon damage by 100% by buying Glass Cannon, Restorative Shot, and Rapid Rounds, we can see that Alchemical Fire still provides 16 bonus damage, showing that weapon damage percent does not affect the bonus damage of Alchemical Fire. Additive amplifiers are a type of damage amplification that all add together. If the dummy buys Inhibitor, we are affected by an additive amplifier of -35%. Despite our reduced damage, the bonus damage from Alchemical Fire is still 16, showing that additive amplifiers have no effect on Alchemical Fire's bonus damage. Abilities that provide flat weapon damage, such as Grey Talon's 2, also do not affect the bonus damage of Alchemical Fire, as the bonus damage provided is still 16. If the dummy is really far away from us, where weapon fall off will reduce our damage by 90%, we can see that Alchemical Fire's bonus damage is not affected by weapon fall off, which is interesting. Improved Bullet Armor is an item that provides 50% bullet resist. If the dummy buys it, we will see that bonus damage from Alchemical Fire is reduced from 16 to 8, showing that bullet resist affects the bonus damage. If the dummy sells that bullet armor, and is instead affected by one of the abilities that increase bullet damage taken by an enemy, in this case Grey Talon's 3, we will see that Alchemical Fire's bonus damage is increased. Headshots deal increased damage, and when we headshot the dummy we can see that the bonus damage of Alchemical Fire is also increased. To test multiplicative amps, we will swap to Mo and Krill, who is a 15% stackable multiplicative amplifier. Applying 10 stacks means this becomes a 150% multiplicative amplifier. On this setup, Mo and Krill gains 8 bonus damage from Alchemical Fire. When we stack the multiplicative amplifier 10 times over, we can see that the bonus damage is also affected, as the bonus damage is increased from 8 to 20. This test also shows that spread shots affect the bonus damage, as Mo and Krill shoots multiple bullets per shot. The damage boost per bullet was 2, but because Mo and Krill shoots 4 bullets per shot, this was multiplied to 8. The last test involves Viscus's and Yamato's alternate fires. We will use Viscus's alternate fire for this example. The base bullet damage of Viscus's alternate fire is 63. So, logically, when boosted by Alchemical Fire, we would expect a damage boost of 25. However, the damage boost is 4. For whatever reason, Alchemical Fire only considers the base bullet damage of the primary fire even if we use alternate fires. In this case, Viscus's base bullet damage of his primary fire is 9.9. This is multiplied by 40% to 3.96, which rounds to 4 in our example. Viscus's and Yamato's alternate fires have explosive falloff, meaning they do less damage at the edge of the blast radius. Alchemical Fire will also ignore the explosive falloff of these alternate fires, which I guess isn't so strange given that Alchemical Fire ignores weapon falloff as well. To update the weapon damage formula, let's say that Alchemical Fire damage is equal to the base bullet damage multiplied by 40%. This variable, AlchFire, adds to damage after falloff and explosive falloff, and then the remaining variables multiply everything. This is the weapon damage formula that I will use going forward, unless something changes of course, which could very well happen. Headhunter and its component Headshot Booster are items that deal a flat amount of damage when the player hits a headshot. They function the exact same, but I will use Headshot Booster for the following examples. Grey Talon ordinarily deals 45 damage. When Headshot Booster activates, his damage jumps to 85. A 40 damage difference, which is what we would expect. Keep this value in mind as it will be the value we compare against for all of the following tests. If we buy Basic Magazine, which increases our weapon damage percent, our damage will be 53, and when Headshot Booster activates, our damage will be 93, a damage increase of 40. This shows that weapon damage percent does not affect the bonus damage of Headshot Booster. Grey Talons 2 provides flat weapon damage. We can see that his damage is 62, and when Headshot Booster activates, it increases by 40 to 102. This means that flat weapon damage also does not affect the amount of damage Headshot Booster deals. Being affected by an additive amplifier also does not affect the amount of damage Headshot Booster deals. Here, despite being affected by Inhibitor, the amount of damage Headshot Booster provides is still 40. Likewise, the amount of base bullet damage does not affect the amount of damage Headshot Booster deals. If we max out Grey Talon's level, which increases his base bullet damage, we still see that the damage difference is 40. When we account for weapon falloff, which reduces your damage by up to 90% at range, our damage is 4, and when Headshot Booster activates, our damage is 8. This shows that Headshot Booster is affected by weapon falloff. If Headshot Booster wasn't affected by weapon falloff, we would have expected a damage increase of 40 and a total damage of 44 instead. If I get a friendly dummy to throw Alchemical Fire on the enemy dummy, the bonus damage is increased by 9 from 40 to 49. Showing that Headshot Booster's damage is boosted by Alchemical Fire. The damage bonus provided by Alchemical Fire is not subject to weapon falloff, as in this example Headshot Booster's bonus damage was increased by 9 again, but this time from 4 to 15. Alchemical Fire not being affected by weapon falloff is true for every weapon damage instance. But what about bullet resist? If the dummy buys improved bullet armor, which provides 50% bullet resist, our damage will be 22. And our damage when Headshot Booster activates will be 42, a damage difference of 20, showing that Headshot Booster is affected by bullet resist. Let's sell improved bullet armor on the dummy and instead use Grey Talons 3, which is one of the abilities that increase bullet damage dealt against a target. Here we can see that Grey Talon will deal 59 and 111 damage respectively, an increase of 52, showing that bullet damage percent increases the amount of damage dealt by Headshot Booster. Now remember how I said that Headshot Booster and Headhunter don't deal headshot damage? We can show this by considering what affects headshot damage, or crit damage. Ordinarily, hitting a crit multiplies your damage by 90%. But this 90% is affected by two other variables. One of them is crit reduction, which can be found on VIII. This means he takes less crit damage compared to other characters. Despite this, he does not take less headshot booster damage, as the difference is still 40. The other of the two variables is crit bonus scale. It affects how much crit damage a player deals and can be found on Kelvin. This means he deals less crit damage compared to other characters. Despite this, Headshot Booster will still deal an additional 40 damage against opponents. Headshot Booster not being affected by crit bonus scale or crit reduction said to me that it isn't crit damage or headshot damage. Multiplicative amplifiers multiply the amount of damage an enemy takes, and it also affects Headshot Booster. Here, McGinnis amplifies the amount of damage an enemy takes from her by 15%, and we can see that the damage Headshot Booster provides is 46. This means that the amount of damage Headshot Booster provides is equal to 40, or 130 in the case of Headhunter, multiplied by Weapon Falloff, plus Alchemical Fire. Then everything is multiplied by enemy bullet resist, the increased bullet damage enemies take, and multiplicative amps. There are some other notable interactions though. Any bullet in a spread shot can activate Headshot Booster, and the amount of bullets hit in a spread shot does not affect the amount of damage Headshot Booster deals. Additionally, if you hit multiple enemies, Headshot Booster will only be activated on one of them. This logic also extends to Weapon Multi-Shot, which can only be gained on Grey Talons too.
Finding a better angle.
Headshot Booster can also be activated on Shiv's alternate fire. Viscus's and Yamato's alternate fires cannot headshot, which must mean they cannot activate. Oh, interesting. I guess that makes some sense as you are hitting the enemy's head. What also makes sense is that Headshot Booster won't activate on the AoE of the explosion. What is very interesting to me is that Paradox's 3 is able to headshot and is also able to activate Headshot Booster and Headhunter. However, Vindicta's 4, which is also an ability that can headshot, does not activate Headshot Booster and Headhunter. Holliday's 3 functions similarly to Headshot Booster and Headhunter. If Holliday hits a headshot, bonus damage is applied to the enemy. However, Holliday's 3 does have some notable differences. For the following tests, our reference value will be 60. An obvious difference is that the amount of damage dealt by Holliday's 3 can be increased with her T2 upgrade and also Spirit Power. Much like Headshot Booster and Headhunter, weapon damage percent does not affect how much damage is dealt. The damage was still 60. Increasing base bullet damage also does not affect how much damage is dealt by Holliday's 3. Unlike Headshot Booster and Headhunter, additive amplifiers do affect how much damage is dealt. If we are affected by Inhibitor, the difference in damage drops to 35, a very strange value. If we were to simply multiply Holliday's 3 with Inhibitor, the damage difference would be 39, which is different from the observed value of 35. Now for whatever reason, the total value of additive amplifiers are multiplied by the spirit scaling of Holliday's 3, which is 1.2. This gives us the correct damage difference of 34.8, which rounds to 35 in my example. I have a feeling that the total additive amp value being multiplied by spirit scaling is unintentional. As stated in the ability description, Holliday's 3 is not affected by weapon falloff. If my friendly dummy throws Alchemical Fire onto the enemy dummy, we can see that Holliday's 3 is affected by Alchemical Fire. If the dummy buys improved bullet armor, the difference in damage drops from 60 to 30 because of the 50% bullet resist. Asking ourselves the question, is Holliday's 3 crit damage, will result in a no. This is because VIII, with its 35% crit reduction, does not take less damage from Holliday's 3. We can't test Holliday's 3 with flat weapon damage, spread shots, weapon multi-shots, alternate fires, or multiplicative amps because Holliday doesn't have access to them, nor are characters with those features able to use Holliday's 3. The amount of damage dealt by Holliday's 3 is equal to the ability damage, which is this number on the ability and factors in the base damage, ability point upgrades, and any spirit power, multiplied by additive amps, where the total additive amp value is multiplied by the 1.2 spirit scaling, plus Alchemical Fire, with everything multiplied by enemy bullet resist. Haze's 3 is a passive where she applies stacks of fixation against a target as she shoots them. When a target with fixation is shot, they take a set amount of bonus damage. Just by reading, we can see that applying more stacks increases the amount of damage dealt. The T2 upgrade will increase the maximum amount of stacks, while the T3 upgrade will increase the amount of bonus damage provided by each stack. Sadly, you can't see your stacks, which was a feature that was removed. However, you can see your stacks if you are shot by Haze. The reference value for these set of tests will be 16, which is 0.2 multiplied by 80. Increasing Haze's weapon damage percent will not affect the amount of damage provided by Haze's 3. The same is true when you increase Haze's base bullet damage. When we are affected by an additive amp, in this case inhibitor, we can see it has no effect on the bonus damage from Haze's 3. Haze's 4 provides flat weapon damage, and does not affect the damage bonus of Haze's 3. At a distance where fall off is at its maximum, we can see that the bonus damage from Haze's 3 is affected. Much like other weapon damage instances so far, Alchemical Fire affects the bonus damage of Haze's 3. Haze's 3 is also affected by bullet resist. When the dummy has 50% bullet resist, the damage bonus is cut from 16 down to 8. The last test concerns critical hits. If we hit the dummy, we can see the bonus damage is increased. As crit damage is affected by crit reduction, VII will take less bonus damage compared to the dummy on crit hits. Putting this into an equation gives us the following. The damage bonus is multiplied by the amount of stacks, multiplied by weapon fall off, add Alchemical Fire, and then multiply everything with enemy bullet resist and the crit multiplier due to headshots. Much like Holliday, we aren't able to test Haze's 3 with the following because it isn't possible. The order of operations is important. First the bullet deals damage, then Haze's 3 deals damage, and finally the stacks of fixation are updated. This means shooting a dummy who has no stacks of fixation will result in 0 bonus damage, as firstly the damage of the bullet is applied, then the damage of 0 fixation stacks, which is obviously 0, and then a stack of fixation is applied after. You can see the bonus damage wasn't applied because there was no second damage instance. And if a dummy had 51 stacks, Haze's bullet will deal damage, then the damage of 51 stacks is applied, and finally a 52nd stack is applied. When the player shoots their gun, there is a 34% chance for the shot to deal 110% bonus weapon damage. This bonus damage is unable to crit. Contrary to what you might think, this weapon damage is not the same as other sources of weapon damage. Here is a side-by-side example. On the left is 128% weapon damage, and on the right is 18% weapon damage and the additional 110% from Lucky Shot. For the following tests, the reference value will be 29. Increasing base bullet damage results in an increase in the bonus damage provided by Lucky Shot. The same is true when we increase our weapon damage percent. Being affected by an additive amp, in this case Bebop's 2, also affects the bonus damage from Lucky Shot. I bet you thought that I would use Inhibitor again, didn't you? Using an ability that provides flat weapon damage, so in this case Grey Talons 2, will also affect the amount of bonus damage from Lucky Shot. Lucky Shot bonus damage is also affected by weapon fall-off. If the enemy is standing in Alchemical Fire, it will affect the bonus damage of Lucky Shot. Bullet Resist also affects the bonus damage from Lucky Shot, noticeable when the dummy buys improved bullet armor. Abilities that increase the amount of bullet damage an enemy takes also affects Lucky Shot. As stated in the item description, the damage from Lucky Shot cannot crit. To test multiplicative amps, we will swap to Mo and Krill. This changes our reference value to 16. Using Mo and Krill's 1, which has a 15% multiplicative amp, shows that Lucky Shot is affected by multiplicative amps. Alternate fires are also able to activate Lucky Shot. Lucky Shot will also activate on the AoE of Viscus's and Yamato's alternate fires. Do note with Viscus's and Yamato's alternate fires, the additional damage caused by Lucky Shot takes into account the base bullet damage of their alternate fire. Lucky Shot will also take into account the explosive fall-off of their alternate fires as well. So what does this 110% represent? Well, it's actually the multiplier to the original damage. It's quite easy to see when our damage is 100. When Lucky Shot activates, the 100 is multiplied by 110%, which is 110. And then the damage is applied alongside the original damage of 100, which totals 210. This 110% will multiply damage after flat weapon damage, but before Alchemical Fire. We can show this with two separate tests. To show Lucky Shot multiplies damage after flat weapon damage, we'll use a max level Lash who has a base bullet damage of 17.65, and then give him 70% weapon damage. Lashes 2 provides 6 flat weapon damage that stacks with each use. Using this 5 times will give us a total of 30 flat weapon damage. This results in a total damage of 60. When Lucky Shot activates, the bonus damage provided is 66. Looking at the maths, we can see that Lucky Shot multiplied damage after flat weapon damage to give us the bonus damage of 66. If Lucky Shot multiplied damage before flat weapon damage, the bonus damage would have been 63. To show that Lucky Shot multiplies damage before Alchemical Fire is added, we shall switch to a max level Holliday, who has a base bullet damage of 52, as well as 46% weapon damage. When the enemy is standing in Alchemical Fire, they will take 96 damage. When Lucky Shot activates, the additional damage provided is 104. This is because Lucky Shot multiplied damage before Alchemical Fire. If Lucky Shot had multiplied damage after Alchemical Fire, we would have expected Lucky Shot to provide an additional 106 damage. Spread Shot shoot multiple bullets, which has an interesting interaction with Lucky Shot. If we shoot 2 targets, either both or neither take the bonus damage from Lucky Shot. This shows that Lucky Shot is determined as you shoot your gun. Because each bullet activates Lucky Shot, we can see the damage varies based on the amount of shots hit. And like spread shots, either all or none of the shots in a weapon multi-shot activate Lucky Shot. Also, the bullet tracer of bullets empowered by Lucky Shot is noticeably different. The damage provided by a single activation of Lucky Shot is equal to the base bullet damage, multiplied by weapon damage percent and additive amps, plus flat weapon damage. Then everything is multiplied by Lucky Shot's 110% multiplier, weapon fall-off, and explosive fall-off, which is only applicable on Viscus's and Yamato's alternate fires. Then we add Alchemical Fire's damage, then multiply everything by enemy bullet resist, increased bullet damage percent, multiplicative amps, and then the amount of bullets hit in a spread shot. Instance amplifiers represent the damage amplification of these abilities. Unlike other types of amplifiers, it shows the second damage instance. This second damage instance makes it distinctly different from other types of damage amplifiers. For these tests, we will use Pockets 1 at T3, which gives us a total of 40% damage amplification. The reference value for these tests will be 13, but I will also use a second reference value of 40%. Instance amplifiers are affected by changes in base bullet damage. The same is true for weapon damage percent. We also observe that a different type of damage amplifier, in this case additive amps, also affect instance amplifiers. Using pockets 2 at T3 provides flat weapon damage, which affects the bonus damage from instance amplifiers. Instance amplifiers obey the laws of weapon falloff. If our friendly dummy throws Alchemical Fire on the enemy dummy, we can see that pocket's 40% instance amp only multiplies damage by 32%. Okay, that's a bit strange, but let's swap to Lady Geist and use her 15% instance amp instead. Now we see our damage is multiplied by 39% from a 15% amplifier. These strange interactions are weird, but there are two reasons for it. Instance amplifiers multiply damage before Alchemical Fire is added. This isn't too strange given that Lucky Shot also does the same thing. Using the Lady Geist example, let's dive into the maths. Lady Geist has a base bullet damage of 22.5, an instance amplifier of 15%, and Alchemical Fire adding 9 damage. This results in a bonus damage of 12, which as we can see was the bonus damage provided by Lady Geist's 15% instance amplifier. If the instance amplifier multiplied damage after Alchemical Fire, the bonus damage would have been 4 instead. Let's do the same maths, but for the Pocket example. Pocket has 4.5 base bullet damage, a 40% instance amplifier, and 1.8 damage from Alchemical Fire. Pocket uses a spread shot weapon that shoots 7 bullets at a time, so this multiplies the damage by 7. This results in the instance amp providing 25 bonus damage, which as we can see, is very wrong. The reason for this is quite weird and is because of spread shots. Spread shots shoot multiple bullets. Each bullet is a unique entity which runs its own damage calculation when it hits an opponent. In the case of Lucky Shot, it will run its damage bonus on each individual bullet. However, instance amplifiers do not acknowledge the existence of each bullet in a spread shot as their own entity. This means that instance amplifiers will run its damage bonus once per set of bullets hit. Mathematically, it means that spread shots will multiply damage before Alchemical Fire. Doing this will change the amount of bonus damage from 25 down to 14. Which as we can see, is correct. Moving on to bullet resist, we can see it affects the bonus damage. And finally, critting an enemy will also affect the bonus damage. This means the damage from instance amplifiers is equal to the base bullet damage multiplied by weapon damage and additive amplifiers plus flat weapon damage. We then multiply everything by the value of the instance amplifier, weapon falloff, and the amount of bullets hit in a spread shot, plus the damage from Alchemical Fire. Everything is then multiplied by enemy bullet resist and the crit multiplier due to headshots. As for these, it's currently not possible to test them with instance amplifiers. Also, it's worth noting that damage calculations for spread shots are run twice if some bullets crit and others do not. I'll elaborate more in part 2, with some worked examples. Ricochet will redirect your shot to a nearby target. If the target hit by Ricochet is next to another target, the bullet will be ricocheted again, which means a total of 3 targets can be hit. The primary target will take 100% of the damage, while the secondary targets will take 60% of the damage. For these tests, the reference value will be 16, which is the amount of damage the secondary target took. The second reference value of 60% is the amount of damage the secondary target took relative to the primary target, which is also the current multiplier that Ricochet provides. Increasing base bullet damage affects the amount of damage dealt by Ricochet. The same is true when weapon damage percent is increased, although not all sources of weapon damage function with Ricochet. Point Blank in its component Close Quarters, Sharpshooter in its component Long Range, as well as Pristine Emblem are all conditional sources of weapon damage. None of the mentioned items will provide their weapon damage boost against the secondary target. It doesn't matter if the primary and/or secondary target meet the conditions for the weapon damage boost. In this example, I used Point Blank. Here, the primary target takes 40 damage and the secondary target takes 18 damage. And in this example, I used Toxic Bullets, Active Reload, and Inhibitor, which give the same amount of weapon damage as Point Blank. Here, the primary target takes 40 damage and the secondary target takes 24 damage, showing that Point Blank doesn't work with the ricocheted bullet. Additive amps also affect the damage of Ricochet, as well as flat weapon damage. Weapon fall-off also affects Ricochet's damage. The additional distance travelled by the bullet when it ricochets isn't accounted for in the fall-off calculations, which can be seen in this example. The secondary targets don't take different amounts of damage despite being different distances away. If the primary target buys improved bullet armor, they take less damage, but the secondary target does not. If we flip the scenario and have the secondary target buy improved bullet armor, they take decreased damage while the primary target does not. And of course, if both of them buy improved bullet armor, both of them will take reduced damage. This shows that Ricochet takes into account the bullet resist of each target that it hits. Identical behaviour can be observed with bullet damage percent, where Ricochet will take into account the bullet damage percent of each target hit.
Who doesn't love a surprise? They won't know what hit them.
Alchemical Fire boosts the damage of Ricochet, but it is not affected by the 60% multiplier. Ricochet will take into account if each target is standing in Alchemical Fire, similar to how the bullet resist of each enemy is taken into account of each target hit. Ricochet will also take into account the multiplicative amplifiers of each target hit. Here I used Mo and Krill's 15% stacking multiplicative amplifier twice over for a total of 30% multiplicative amp.
We're not dying today. Momo, don't back down.
If we crit the primary target, the damage won't be increased for the secondary target. If the ricocheted bullet hits the head of the secondary target, the damage is still not increased. This shows that crits do not affect Ricochet. The amount of bullets hit in a spread shot will affect the amount of damage dealt by Ricochet. Just be mindful that at longer ranges the ricocheted bullets can miss due to their bullet spread. Ricochet will also work with alternate fires. On Viscus's and Yamato's alternate fire, only a direct hit will result in a ricochet. Viscus's and Yamato's ricochet projectiles are still explosive, which means that any of the targets not directly hit are subject to explosive fall-off. However, because the projectiles are explosive, it means that any targets in really close proximity take massive damage because the explosion of each hit is damaging multiple targets. Do keep in mind that the explosive projectiles are really slow, which means they are prone to missing their target. The damage dealt by Ricochet is equal to the base bullet damage, multiplied by weapon damage percent and additive amps, plus flat weapon damage. We then multiply everything by Ricochet's 60% multiplier, weapon fall-off, and explosive fall-off, and then add the damage from Alchemical Fire. Everything is multiplied by enemy bullet resist, increased bullet damage, multiplicative amps, and the amount of bullets hit in a spread shot. It's also worth noting that any one of the bullets in a weapon multi-shot will ricochet. Hitting the same target with multiple bullets in a weapon multi-shot will not result in multiple ricochets, however. The final weapon damage instance I will cover is Return Fire. While Return Fire is active and the user is hit by a bullet, the bullet is returned back to the attacker. For these tests, the user is the player using Return Fire, and the attacker is the player attacking the user. The reference value is the amount of damage the attacker takes, which is 13. When the attacker increases their base bullet damage, they will take more damage. The user's base bullet damage is disregarded. The weapon damage percent of the attacker will affect how much damage they take. The weapon damage percent of the user is disregarded. When the attacker is affected by an additive amp, it affects how much damage they take from Return Fire. If the user is affected by an additive amp, it won't affect Return Fire's damage. Return Fire takes into account the flat weapon damage of the attacker and not the user.
Time for evasive tactics.
Fall-off does affect Return Fire damage, however it is a bit strange. In this example, you can see the user takes over 200 damage up close, only for the attacker to take 1 damage from far away. 200 multiplied by return fire's 60% multiplied by a fall-off multiplier of 10% is 12, not 1. My best guess is that fall-off is the attacker's fall-off being calculated twice over, but it's hard to verify this. For simplicity, I'm going to say that the attacker's fall-off is squared even though it's not 100% accurate in all scenarios. If the user is standing in Alchemical Fire, the attacker will not take more damage. While if the attacker is standing in Alchemical Fire, they will take more damage. The amount of damage provided by Alchemical Fire is based on the user's base bullet damage, which you can see in this example as Pocket has a lower base bullet damage than Holliday. It also shouldn't be a surprise that the damage provided by Alchemical Fire is not subject to Return Fire's 60% multiplier or weapon fall-off. The user's bullet resist does not affect the amount of damage the attacker takes. The attacker's bullet resist does affect the amount of damage they take. Increasing the amount of bullet damage the user takes will not increase the amount of bullet damage the attacker takes from Return Fire. However, if the user uses an ability that increases the amount of bullet damage taken by an attacker, the attacker will take more damage from Return Fire. The same is true for multiplicative amplifiers. Any multiplicative amplifiers inflicted against the user won't affect the amount of damage taken by the attacker. But instead, any multiplicative amplifiers inflicted against the attacker will increase the amount of damage they take from Return Fire. The amount of bullets that the attacker hits in a spread shot will affect the amount of damage they take. What is interesting to note is that only 1 bullet is returned to the attacker, unless some of the bullets hit the head and some hit the body. I'll explain that later. Only 1 bullet being sent back to the attacker is significant because of Alchemical Fire, as it means that Alchemical Fire will affect the damage of Return Fire after spread shots, similar to instance amplifiers. In this example, Pocket shoots Holliday while standing in her Return Fire, and takes 30 damage. This is because of Pocket's 4.5 base bullet damage, the 60% multiplier of Return Fire, Pocket shooting 7 bullets from his spread shot weapon, and Holliday's Alchemical Fire damage of 11.6, which is her base bullet damage of 29 multiplied by Alchemical Fire's 40%. Had Return Fire shot 7 bullets back at Pocket, 1 for each bullet in his spread shot, spread shots would multiply damage after Alchemical Fire, which means the damage dealt by Return Fire would have been 100 instead. Return Fire will return the damage dealt by alternate fires. A direct hit is required by Viscus's alternate fire. Indirect hits will not cause damage to be returned. Return Fire will return the damage of Yamato's alternate fire on both a direct and indirect hit. In the case of an indirect hit, explosive fall-off is accounted for. Both Viscus's and Yamato's alternate fires do not return an explosive projectile. If the attacker hits a crit against the user, the attacker will not take more damage. If the bullet returned hits the attacker's head, then the attacker will take more damage. Crits normally take into account the crit bonus scale of the attacker and the crit reduction of the defender. Return Fire flips this relationship. In this example, Kelvin with no power increases and Mirage with 3 power increases both deal 18.9 damage. However, Kelvin has minus 20% crit bonus scale, while Mirage has nothing. When both of them shoot a hero with 0% crit bonus scale, both of them will take 21 damage from Return Fire if it hits them in the head. However, if they shoot a Kelvin, who has minus 20% crit bonus scale, both of them will take 19 damage, showing that Return Fire takes into account the crit bonus scale of the user and not the attacker. To test crit reduction, we have 7 with 4 power increases and Lash with 7 power increases. They deal almost the same damage at 12.55 and 12.56 respectively. However, 7 has minus 35% crit reduction. When they shoot a hero with 0% crit reduction, 7 takes 12 damage and Lash takes 14 damage from Return Fire if it hits them in the head. If they shoot 7, who has minus 35% crit reduction, the result is unchanged. This shows that Return Fire takes into account the crit reduction of the attacker. The bullet from Return Fire can still crit even if it was caused by Viscus's or Yamato's alternate fires, which cannot crit. This is true even if Yamato's alternate fire is an indirect hit. The weapon damage dealt by return fire against an attacker is equal to the attacker's base bullet damage, weapon damage percent, additive amplifiers, and flat weapon damage. This is multiplied by the 60% of return fire, the attacker's fall off squared, explosive fall off, and the amount of bullets the attacker hits in a spread shot. The user's alchemical fire damage is then added. Everything is multiplied by the attacker's bullet resist, the increased bullet damage the attacker takes from the user's multiplicative amplifiers inflicted against the attacker, and the headshot multiplier, where the user's crit bonus scale and the attacker's crit reduction is considered. And that's part 1 complete. Sorry about the information overload, it's quite hard to make a video that goes over several different damage equations and be easy to understand, especially with a lack of worked examples. This video would probably be over an hour long if there were worked examples, although looking back on it, I think the video could have been easier to understand with a better structure. Also, you could argue that the testing methodology that I presented in the video is flawed, especially without the worked examples. But I have used the equations plenty while making this video, so I'm very confident that they work. Until the devs change things, or someone makes a new discovery regarding weapon damage instances. Thank you for watching, and please stick around for more mathematical yap.